Hello everyone, my name is Kristina Balotai and I am the lead photographer for Orca Channel. And he is Vladimir. Vladimir is an incredibly special beluga whale and we are dedicating this documentary to his story. This documentary includes expert interviews to help better understand his situation, and we will be sharing how people can ensure a positive future for him in the waters of Norway.
I'm Suzanne Steinert, the founder and director of Beluga Whale Alliance, a 501c3 nonprofit and NGO based in Cook Inlet, Alaska. And our mission is to support the local and global conservation of beluga whales to create a shared future where humans and belugas thrive. Like everybody, we've been following Valdimir's story since he showed up in Norway a few years ago and have been captivated by all of the viral videos of him playing with seagulls, fetching rugby balls, and picking up people's iPhones and GoPros that they drop in the water. And in my experience, there's never been a beluga whale that has captured the entire world's attention quite like Valdimir. But like everything, there's more context and nuance to the reality of his situation than the viral videos show. But what the viral videos really do and why they're so valuable is that they really showcase to people just how incredibly curious, social, and intelligent beluga whales, not just as individuals, but also as a species, are. Thanks to the visibility of those videos and their global distribution, Valdimir has really become one of the best possible ambassadors for belugas as a species. He's really enabled millions of people around the world to see just how special belugas really are, and hopefully all of that will help more people than ever before care about belugas, support their conservation, and increase awareness about the issues that impact the species globally around the world.
I am Valeria Vergara, and I am a research scientist with a background in behavioral ecology, and I have been studying beluga whales for the better part of 2 decades now. So I have had the great fortune of watching these animals in their natural environments during my field studies in various areas of Canada. And I think that to understand Vladimir's predicament, one has to understand beluga sociality. Belugas are known to be the social butterflies of the whale world. They are just an incredibly sociable species. They form long-term associations, not just with relatives, but also with non-relatives. So they make friends with other belugas outside of their family units, and they keep these friendships for life. And there is recent research that shows that belugas have traits that are quite similar to traits that we find in human societies, actually. So they form communities and networks, they cooperate with each other, they do things like help raise each other's young. So I often reflect on what a social and tactile species belugas can be. One can sometimes see little calves quite literally riding their mother's backs, or very playful juveniles that form what I like to call beluga chains, where each animal rests their head on the upper body of the preceding animal, and they swim like that in constant contact, physical contact with each other. You can see males playing quite physically with each other as well, or female calf pairs that are flanked by great juveniles or offspring from previous seasons, and they all swim in a really tight formation, as if they were one unit. And the chatter is constant because belugas use vocal communication to mediate these social interactions. And this is why belugas are nicknamed the canaries of the sea. So understanding this very profound sociality helps us understand why Vladimir often seeks out the companionship of humans. And this is very much like other solitary sociable belugas that somehow find themselves very far from their native home ranges. And this has happened in other areas of the world. And these belugas also tend to seek out the company of humans. So Vladimir's past life is a bit of a mystery, but we do know a few things about him. He is a beluga whale, of course, and so he carries within him an evolutionary legacy of deep sociality. We know that beluga males also form very long-lasting associations and alliances with other males, and Vladimir is a lone male. And we know that he has been at some point in his life under human care, and so this makes humans an easy choice for him as social companions if he gets lonely. And so this, of course, makes him vulnerable, not just to unintentional accidents, but also to harassment. So it is our responsibility to ensure that he continues to be safe. And this is doable through public education and through guidelines, perhaps, that have been developed by stewardship models in other areas of the world, such as the Whale Stewardship Project in Nova Scotia.
My name is Dr. Toni Frohoff. I am the Senior Advisor to the Whale Stewardship Project. I am a behavioral biologist who has been studying wildlife, mostly cetaceans, meaning dolphins and whales, for about 30 years. 20 of those years has been spent intermittently working with the Whale Stewardship Project, specifically with Catherine Kinsman, who founded the organization and is the project director. Solitary belugas used to be somewhat considered a unique phenomenon. We seem to be seeing more of them. There are more whales who are being separated or have chosen to go off on their own or in smaller groups. So this is an issue that is warranting some very serious study for the health and well-being of the individual whales as well as for the populations.
Vladimir is a beluga whale who first appeared in Hammerfest, northern Norway in May 2019. He had a harness on his body trademarked Russia, St. Petersburg. Vladimir was freed from the harness by a local Norwegian fisherman who was surprised to encounter him while fishing. Free from the harness, he made his way to the harbor of Hammerfest and decided to spend some time there. Nobody knew anything about him and his past, where he came from. He was a lovely stranger who seemed to be lost. He looked like he hadn't eaten for a while. The public has chosen Valdimir's name through a poll organized by the Norwegian broadcasting company NRK. It is a combination of the Norwegian word for whale, Val, and Dimir, a reference to the current ruler of Russia, Vladimir Putin.
I have not been to Norway. I have not seen Vladimir in person. I am speaking about his well-being based on hours of video footage, looking at photographs, interviewing people. I am trying to do my best from a distance to look at the situation to see how there can be a win-win, because it doesn't have to be either or. It's just that we have to think outside the box.
Vladimir appeared to be a trained animal based on the attached harness and his strong interest in people. He was willing to follow specific hand signals which indicated that he must have been under human care in his past. However, we can only speculate about his past. Has he come from the Russian military? Was he from a center for beluga therapy with children or an entertainment facility? How he had got away? Did he escape on purpose, or did he just become separated from his caretakers? We don't know. Vladimir cannot tell, and nobody has ever shown up claiming that Vladimir is missing. all we see is that Valdimir has a visible fascination and connection with humans, and likewise, Valdimir fascinates us.
When we talk about sociality in beluga whales who are alone, that may sound like an oxymoron, but it's basically the social behavior is directed from the beluga whale to humans. So when a beluga whale is lone or solitary and sociable, that means that whale is curious, perhaps seeking sociable interaction with humans, boats, human activity. So that desire to be social is apparently directed to humans and human activity, perhaps because we are the closest thing to other beluga whales they have access to. Every beluga whale is different in terms of physical health, what appears to be mental health, temperament. Of course, age and gender have a lot to do with all of these factors. Our primary obligation is to try to keep these belugas alive and to keep their well-being up to a standard where they are psychologically and physically healthy and well enough to live at least the best possible quality lives that they can, even if they are alone. Valdimir's situation is very similar on the surface to other solitary sociable belugas we've studied, but in many deeper ways, his situation is unique from other solitary sociable beluga whales who were born and grew up in the wild. And for this reason, our recommendations for Valdimir have to be very, very specific to his origin, which if he wasn't born in captivity, he has obviously been in captivity in human care for a long time.
I'm Catherine Kinsman. It was my honor many years ago to co-found the Whale Stewardship Project with my partner, Ken Peterson, and to collaborate with Dr. Tony Frohoff on designing and implementing the first ever study of solitary sociable beluga whales. Over the course of 20 years, leading research and protection for these animals primarily in Canada, I observed several solitary belugas who became sociable with humans. Many of them became injured, several seriously, and some even fatally. So when Valdimir showed up in Norway, clearly having been trained, yet also exhibiting many of the behaviors that we had been studying, I felt that there was so much that he could teach us, and that the wild solitary sociables might offer in helping to protect him. I had the privilege of meeting Valdimir in Hammerfest thanks to the Norwegian Orca survey, and I was able to observe his response to various stimuli. Because of his mysterious background, there was no way of knowing everything he had previously been taught or what he understood about humans. What I recognized was how easily people might misunderstand his signals and attempts to communicate. I felt strongly that for however long he might remain in close association with people, it would be important that there be someone with expertise to observe him, look out for him, and help the public better understand him.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, that's a behavior.
Oh, yeah.
That what I'm doing must sound like some sound.
Okay, good boy.
That's really interesting.
Uh-huh.
That sound must sound, I don't know, like a whistle, like something, because he's targeting. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's targeting. Okay, good boy.
Good boy. Okay.
After a short while, when it became apparent that Valdimir had no intention to leave, a private research organization, Norwegian Orca Survey, who study long-term orcas in Norwegian waters, stepped in to help the whale. Norwegian Orca Survey arrived on site to check the situation to see if Valdimir required help. After an initial assessment of his body condition, through shared video and direct observation, it looked like he needed nutritional support. Since Valdimir didn't have a natural feeding behavior and it turned out that he must have been in managed care, Norwegian Orca Survey asked for professional help from Lindsay Rubinkamp. Over the last 2 years, Lindsay has traveled to Norway to visit Valdimir several times and help with his care.
My name is Lindsay Rubinkamp, and I'm a marine mammal welfare consultant with over 30 years of experience working directly with a variety of different species of animals. Lending my skills and expertise to the survival of Valdimir in Hammerfest back in May of 2019 was my honor and a privilege. Nearly 3 years ago, this journey began, and who would have imagined how it would unfold? When I first arrived in Hammerfest to assist Norwegian Orca Survey with the monitoring and initial health assessment of Valdimir, we established 3 main objectives. The first objective was to stabilize the situation. This included evaluating his overall health and body condition, provide nutritional support once we had the approval of the Norwegian authorities, but also to connect the fisheries department to international experts knowledgeable in the veterinary care of this particular species. The second objective was to initiate the monitoring program. And what this meant was just to begin to assess his natural behavior. We were looking for which areas of the harbor he was using most specifically or most frequently. We were watching for any types of behavioral patterns, things that might indicate areas where he may be fishing or predatory behavior. We were also assessing risk factors, which areas might pose the greatest threats to him as he was establishing residency in the region. This second priority of establishing the monitoring program actually lent itself to assisting us with our third objective, and that was to assess risk factors within the area. The harbor was a very busy commercial industrial location with a large number of visitors arriving by cruise ship and also by work boats or ferry boats. So it was important to continually assess and monitor the activity of the harbor itself and the inhabitants of Hammerfest and how the docks were used, the patterns of the boat in relation to Valdimir's behavior patterns as well, making sure they weren't lending themselves to a conflict of interest or situations that were putting him at greater danger. Since the beginning of the official monitoring program, we made sure to take advantage of his apparent past training and willingness to perform voluntary husbandry behaviors such as a mouth exam, tail fluke presentation, a stationary body lineup position, rolling over on his belly, and all of these different body positions allowed us to obtain video and photos, which we continued to share with the international veterinary experts who were supporting his case. Valdimir's daily care required us to prepare and provide nutritional support while he was learning to effectively hunt fish for himself and meet his own needs for survival. Due to his lean body condition, we began by providing a small quantity of fish at the very start, which increased to approximately 20 kilos a day within the first month. We would separate this quantity into 4 to 6 feeding sessions per day and deliver these feedings through direct delivery, dropping fish into his mouth, or we had other strategies like throwing the fish indirectly from the dock or from the boat so that he would have to learn to eat quickly and, quote, catch the fish for himself. It's important to mention that Valdimir's feeding schedule remained variable and was adjusted daily based on his interest in the fish that was being offered to him.
Valdimir stayed in Hammerfest Harbor from May through mid-July 2019. Throughout this period, we attached a camera tag to his back using suction cups on a regular basis. The goal was to see what Valdimir was doing in between the feeding sessions when he was on his own. We were particularly curious to know whether he was interested in live fish. Sometime in June, video footage showed pre-capture attempts, which indicated that, at least, Valdimir's interest for live fish had increased over time. Unfortunately, often we could not see if his attempts were successful, due to the positioning of the camera relative to his head. But from this point, we decided to adjust the feeding program with various amounts of herring fed each day. This way, we were hoping to trigger some level of hunger and to encourage him to start catching his own fish. It appeared clear that shortly after we had initiated the feeding program, Valdimir's shape and energy level had clearly improved. However, at this time of the story, we didn't know how much Valdimir was relying on humans for his survival. To address this question, we had to figure out whether he was able to feed himself or not. We collected fecal samples at various stages of the feeding and monitoring program. These samples were to be sent to a laboratory for analysis of DNA content and in a hope to identify any other prey species than the herring we fed him with.
Amazingly, Valdimir learned how to take care of himself. He does not accept fish or any kind of food from people since August 2019. Even though some people have tried to offer him food, feed him in various locations, Valdimir, to survive on his own, must have been learning to locate prey naturally, like all wild beluga whales. It may seem strange, but this is why it is essential to avoid the temptation to feed him, and Valdimir can continue to rely on himself instead of humans. So please never try to feed Valdimir or any other wild cetacean.
There is an additional risk presented to Valdimir in this region of Norway, and that's fishing. During the last 3 years, it's clear that Valdimir has learned to hunt live fish for himself. But based on a couple of documented incidents, we also know that he has been hooked on fishing line. And in one of the situations, which happened on June 1st in Hammerfest, he was actually wearing the data recorder at the time. He recorded himself being hooked with a fishing line as he chased after a live fish that was already on that fishing line. We were able to review this video and see exactly what had happened, because all that we knew was that Valdimir showed up for one of his feeding sessions and he was extremely nervous. He wouldn't come close, he wouldn't stay still. He was very nervous, very active, very agitated. And then we could see that he was actually trailing fishing line, which had been hooked into the side of his body. Norwegian Orca Survey had already been present in Hammerfest for nearly a month at this point. So we were very fortunate that we had been able to establish a level of relationship with Valdimir and trust that he was willing to come to us after a period of time because he was very nervous and very agitated. But we were able to have him come close enough and stay still long enough that with a contraption that had been built by Norwegian Orca Survey, we were able to, just with a quick movement, unhook the trailing fishing line and the hook that was lodged into the side of his body. Hopefully, Valdimir will continue to be lucky and hopefully gain the skills to avoid some of these risk factors, such as fishing hooks.
We had to start working on possible long-term, economically sustainable options for Valdimir. Together with the municipality of Hammerfest, it was suggested that Valdimir should be relocated to a quieter, cleaner, and safer fjord in the vicinity. But this was before Valdimir showed the world that he had become capable of feeding himself, of taking breaks from humans, of traveling hundreds of kilometers, and of doing as he pleased.
Although the details are vague regarding the specific events that occurred on the actual day that Valdimir chose to leave Hammerfest, one thing is sure, and that is that he was prepared. During the last month of his residency in Hammerfest, he'd been observed catching and playing with fish, his body weight had reached an optimal level, and he was already using a wide range of locations within the harbor of Hammerfest itself.
After nearly 3 months in Hammerfest, Valdimir started his journey. First, he appeared at a salmon farm on Seiland, an island just across the fjord from Hammerfest. Seiland is less populated, only around 150 people live there. Valdimir visited multiple fish farms and private docks in the following weeks and circled the entire island, 580 square kilometers, numerous times. Catching live fish on his own is not an easy task for an animal that spent most of his life under human care. So how did he do it? Well, Valdimir most likely figured it out that he could find his food easier around salmon farms. Why? As we learned from the fish farm workers, he is not after the salmon. Instead, he looks for fish around the nets who gather there to feast on the salmon food. He has often observed feeding close to the salmon farm nets. Valdimir showed over time that he prefers to stay around farms where the nets have salmon. If he ends up on a salmon farm during his travels where they do not have stock, Valdimir tends to leave the farm after 2-3 days. It's an indication that he learned to take advantage of the salmon farms. You can hear fast echolocation buzzes. Belugas use sonar or echolocation, fast series of broadband clicks to find their food and to navigate in the dark. Of course, Valdimir can and learned to catch live fish on his own. However, that could be more challenging for him. It is essential that he is allowed to be around the nets, otherwise we jeopardize his feeding ability. After nearly a month away, he relocated back to Hammerfest, where he continued to be supervised by Norwegian Orca Survey. This time it was only a brief visit. Valdimir was just saying goodbye to the locals. Then he started his journey southward. The first main stop was Alta, a slightly bigger city than Hammerfest in the north of Norway, with almost 20,000 people. The locals welcomed him with the same enthusiasm he originally received. Norwegian Orca Survey followed him to educate the locals and politicians about the care and precautions around Valdimir.
In Alta, I went on site to assess the situation once again and to see whether he needed to be fed or not. Surprisingly enough, he refused all fish I offered him and behaved somewhat differently. He had become more independent. By the end of 2019, we had gotten the results from the lab. These were firm and positive. Pollock was detected in Valdimir's fecal samples and was the ultimate proof we needed to confirm that he was able to catch his own fish. With such good news, we at Norwegian Orca Survey considered that our mission was completed. We decided to step down from the monitoring program as we had to resume our killer whale research activities.
There is something rather curious about his travel pattern. He keeps swimming southward. Why is that? For now, probably he is the only one who knows. His current location is 1,500 kilometers south of Hammerfest, where he first appeared. However, he still hasn't decided to stop to the present day. Some places he prefers more than others, so he chooses to stay for an extended period. Some areas are less his likes. At Orca Channel, we love all whales, of course, but I must admit it was a big dream of mine to see a free-ranging beluga whale. In January 2020, we were getting ready for our regular whale-watching excursion. Then, out of nowhere, in the morning darkness, Valdimir just appeared in Sherway Harbor with a loud blow. We were almost ready for the boat trip with my partner, Norby, the skipper. Then I heard him shouting outside, "Come, Valdimir is here!" First I thought I might still be asleep, but the sound of quickly approaching people did not go away, so I ran out, and there he was. Valdimir was swimming in the harbor, checking out the people who had quickly gathered to get to see him, and then he left just as quickly as he appeared. I hoped to see Valdimir at least one more time as we went out, so we went very slowly out of the harbor, and there he emerged right next to the boat. All of the guests and both of us were fascinated by this friendly creature.
As a self-described professional beluga watcher, I personally know just how exciting it is to see belugas in the wild and up close, but also how equally important it is to help balance that human interest with the whale's immediate well-being and survival. Especially in Valdimir's specific case, it's so crucial to balance this increase in human interest going forward with his immediate safety.
In February, after the whale season, as we came back to Tromsø, maybe a month later, I saw the news on social media that Valdimir appeared around Tromsø. He had chosen a fjord for himself called Ramfjord. We have visited Valdimir there twice. We continued to send photos and updates about Valdimir's situation to Lindsay and Norwegian Orca Survey. It was important to us to hear their opinions, as they have been the ones who took care of Valdimir from the beginning, knowing him the best. He appeared to be in good shape. He had learned how to take care of himself by this time. Valdimir left Ramfjord in the middle of March, and for a short period there was no news from him. Then he turned up around the surrounding islands of Tromsø before he continued his journey southward again. As the weeks passed, I felt a strong desire to visit Valdimir. I contacted Lindsay, and it turned out she planned to be in Norway in the summer to continue her monitoring efforts through a grant obtained from the Save Our Seas Foundation. Eventually, he ended up in a small fishing town called Gråfjord. Here, Valdimir seemed to enjoy himself very much because he spent more than 6 weeks in a small bay near a campsite. It was an excellent opportunity to meet with Lindsay, share our experiences, and start working together to keep Valdimir's monitoring project continuous. Unfortunately, bad news came just a few days before we arrived to Grovfjord. Valdimir had gotten injured. A more than a meter-long cut was on his right-hand side. The wound looked like a sharp object caused it, but it didn't seem like a propeller cut. It must have been something else. Unfortunately, we will never know what happened. He was resting underneath the fish farm catamaran when we met him on that July night in Grovfjord. He most likely had pain, and his wound was likely itching as he was trying to scratch his back against the bottom of a boat. In Valdimir's case, it's vital to maintain a basic relationship with the whale if he requires further intervention in the future. Therefore, Lindsay and Norwegian Orca Survey previously conditioned Valdimir to position his body in specific ways following hand signals. Using these tools, we measured him, documented the status of his wound and mouth with photographs, and shared all the data with specialized international veterinarians and the Norwegian Department of Fisheries.
The first time I heard about Valdimir, well, of course he didn't have a name back then, was when he appeared on all media all over the world as the Russian spy beluga, which was quite a story, I must say, about the harness done in St. Petersburg, and everybody was obviously very curious about why this beluga whale all of a sudden appeared in Norwegian waters. I actually thought at the beginning, when I started hearing the name, that his name was Vladimir, which I thought back then it was very appropriate considering the story behind. But then it turned out to be Valdimir, which made more sense considering he was actually in Norwegian waters. I guess as everybody else, when I first heard this story, I was really worried about him being able to survive in the Norwegian fjords, because he was obviously trained. He had obviously been under managed care for a long time, I would think, although he seemed quite young from the images. And then kind of the story didn't have an interest anymore, and it just disappeared, although we still heard about it in certain news once in a while. Then in July 2020, Lindsay reached out, Lindsay, who was involved back then in actually following Valdimir's story and following him to a bit ensure his well-being in a kind of sense, although this is quite difficult, him being in the wild and not being able to control anything. So when Lindsay reached out to the EAAM, which is the European Association of Aquatic Mammals, she reached out to the veterinary committee, which I chair, and this was because Valdimir had turned out here with a very large open wound on one of his sides, and she wanted an opinion on the possibility of this wound healing or not, and preventing actually Valdimir from keeping on living as he was doing. So what we did, or what I did, because this came straight to me, as I shared it with the other members of the veterinary committee, we are 25 vets, marine mammal vets, in that committee, and within 48 hours most of them had responded, and all of us were of the opinion that such a wound, despite being as large and big as it was, had a very good chance of healing, which it actually did, as it was followed up in September 2020 with pictures, and it was really healing very, very well.
Even though he had a massive open wound on his side, Valdimir seemed to be able to swim and feed himself. I woke up at 4 a.m. to see how he was doing. He was mingling around the fish farm boats and playing with a piece of kelp. I hoped to see him later, but he had other plans. He went out on his usual morning route to the fish farm, but never returned to Grovfjord again. Nobody knows what drives Valdimir to leave a specific area. Based on our knowledge, he mostly changes locations by following a boat. Another assumption is that Waldimir changes location after a traumatic event. If he left because he got hurt, the negative experience could have caused the move.
My name is Liz Sandham and I'm co-founder of Marine Connection, a UK-based organisation. We've been protecting dolphins, whales and porpoises for over 25 years. Part of my work within the organisation is monitoring solitary dolphins and whales around the world. To date, we have documented over 115 solitary cetaceans, and the UK has had its fair share. We've recorded 22 dolphins around our shoreline, the majority being bottlenose dolphins, and we've even had a beluga whale in the River Thames in London. It appeared in 2018, and after a few months it simply disappeared. When I was alerted to Waldimir's presence in Hammerfest, I was very intrigued to where he came from. Although he was wearing what looked like some kind of military harness, no one really knows where the whale has come from, and no one has ever reported him missing. What was clear, however, was when Waldimir appeared, he was clearly not your average solitary whale. He was very much habituated.
Lindsay arrived 2 days after he disappeared from Grovfjord Fiske Camp. How do you go about finding a lone beluga whale in the fjords of northern Norway? Well, it's an adventure that requires determination, the help of the local community, and constant social media monitoring, and most importantly, a great companion. After 5 days of searching, Lindsay and I tracked him down. We found Waldimir in Ulvika, a beautiful and calm bay almost 35 nautical miles, which is approximately 65 kilometers away from Grovfjord. We searched the location by boat and land. Lindsay and I drove there by car and found the local people on a high dock watching and interacting with Waldimir. Hello. The other members of the Save Our Seas Foundation monitoring team were in a boat having found Waldimir. Hello. Hello. Waldimir loved busy and crowded harbors at the beginning of his journey. However, he has changed over time. We observed that he was seemingly beginning to prefer smaller and more remote areas with fewer people. He was less interested in interacting with many people in a busy harbor. He occasionally visits these busier areas after following a boat to the port, but leaves soon after.
The idea was basically to evaluate his behavior, continue to monitor his physical condition as he continued his journey, and also, and probably what has become the most important, is education and speaking with the locals, speaking with the people who are actually directly in contact with him, and making sure that we share with him as much knowledge as we can about beluga whales in general, but also Waldimir himself, and sharing with them almost from a protective standpoint advice, sharing a code of conduct of how they should actually be interacting with him, and also helping them to maybe read his body behavior, explaining to them when they see certain types of behavior, he's not interested in interacting with humans in that moment, and he is sleeping and should be left alone, or he is choosing to maintain a certain physical distance as people are trying to reach out to him. You can see he pulls his head back, and he's clearly communicating that he would like to be left alone in that moment or period. He's clearly shown us over time, especially if he happens to show up at a dock which is filled with people,
He, at this stage, has clearly demonstrated his independence in deciding who and when he will interact with humans, which humans, when he will do this, how long he will do this for.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, remember this? And the behaviors are helpful because when we have to look at wounds and things like that, if you can remember to just line up and be still, we can get photos and but then he's got his play behaviors too. And
Valdimir spent 2-3 days in Ulvika interacting with the locals before leaving. The local people were friendly and helpful and were happy to share their observations and data about Valdimir.
Unfortunately, it's never possible to 100% guarantee the survival of any one individual beluga in the wild, but there's a lot that local people can do in Norway to help improve Valdimir's likelihood of survival and even possibly his ability to thrive in the waters of Norway.
Still headed south, Valdimir ended up in Kjøpsvik.
the monitoring project is also largely based on tracking his movements due to his sometimes spontaneous relocation. Because of this, local sightings and social media alerts are essential to maintaining his location and whereabouts. One of the tools of my project was a continuous logbook where I included social media posts, videos, photos, maps, and personal communications and exchanges with members of the local community. In the time that he resided in the Kjøpsvik area, we stayed in very close contact with the harbor master and the ferry drivers. They were able to provide us with daily information on sightings within this region, and we started to refer to the region as the Glove. The Glove seemed like one of the safer, more protected areas for Valdimir. There was a central open area which had an island in the middle, and it was surrounded by multiple fish farms. And then it had 4 fjords that seemed to resemble fingers, like on a human hand. And each of these smaller fjords seemed to offer him something different. But mostly, I think they allowed him to be more remote and farther from populated areas. And for this reason, this area seemed to offer a higher level of protection for Valdimir. Can you tell me where he saw the other beluga?
Here, on the way to Sørfjord.
Okay, and how long ago?
2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks ago. And then where was Valdimir yesterday?
Yesterday, he was in Storvika.
Okay.
Out for drag.
Okay.
There.
All right. That's a fish farm?
No, that is it.
The best way to find and monitor Valdimir once he relocates is by studying the maps. Through daily observations and reported sightings, his behavior patterns became more apparent to us. And there seems to be a sort of recipe of different ingredients for what he seeks. These include fish farms, a small dock or harbor area, workboats or ferries that operate regularly, small white dinghies, and the periodic presence of people. Okay, so we're on our way to see Valdimir. He's at the fish farm. He's been there for the last 2 hours. He spent a little bit of time in the harbor, which is behind us, just back there. And we're on our way, and we are with Brigitte, and she's going to introduce us to the people working at the fish farm. We're going to check on things, and the plan is to try to meet with the people that run the fish farm, introduce ourselves, and make sure they understand that they have a contact person in case there's any problems with Valdimir. But also it'll give us a chance to explain a little bit about his history with fish farms and what potential problems that they might have. We're there to help.
Sjøsvik was an important stop in Valdimir's life. He spent almost 3 months there, giving us the perfect opportunity to monitor him and observe his behavior and his wounds healing process. We have spent a week in Sjøsvik together with Lindsay, building a network of people who have helped us with our monitoring efforts afterward. We talked to the locals during our stay and shared our knowledge about Valdimir. The week that we spent there with Valdimir was life-changing. I made a promise that we will continue to look after this whale and help as much as possible to protect his future by working together with the locals, fish farms, and everyone who truly cares for Valdimir.
If you're a local in Norway and you see Valdimir in a port area, you can allow him the space to move freely about the port, whether you're viewing him from a dock on shore or you're in a boat on the water. It's also especially important if you're in a boat on the water to operate your boat in what we like to call a beluga-friendly manner. And that means avoiding making sharp turns, avoiding approaching Valdimir, and also motoring as slowly as possible when you know he's in the area.
When a solitary dolphin, what we call when they come into an area that we've never documented before, they go through habituated stages. Stage 1 is where they come into the area and they're very much a wild animal. They keep their distance, and if a vessel or a human approaches them, they move off. Valdimir, in the very beginning, clearly gravitated towards humans and vessels, and he was at least stage 4. When a dolphin appears around the UK or further afield, Marine Connection immediately starts working with the local authorities and the community to put an educational programme in place. And depending on where the animal is, we also erect educational boards around harbours. With Valdimir, this is just a little bit more difficult. I've got various concerns with regards to Valdimir, and my main one is the mixed messages that is sometimes given out to the public, encouraging them to touch him or directly interact with him on the water. Valdimir doesn't really need entertained, but what he does need, he needs his space and respect. Over the years, we have seen many dolphins and whales killed by becoming so habituated that they lose their wariness, they lose their fear around vessels and humans, and we certainly don't want this happening to Valdimir. So the strong message is we all must keep our distance. What makes it a little bit more difficult with Valdimir as well is over the years he's travelled a great distance, at least over 1,000 kilometres. So this makes it a little bit more difficult to put some kind of educational programme in place when he appears in an area. I understand what it's like and how exciting it is to see a wild dolphin or whale. It's magical, but we really, really must give not only Valdimir, but all solitary dolphins and whales their space. Many have been fatally injured because they simply lose their wariness. We can all play a part in Valdimir's welfare and his future. He's clearly going around his daily whereabouts. He's managing to feed and he's choosing where to visit. Of course, protection measures are vital when it comes to protecting solitary dolphins and whales. But as I say, we can all play a part. But what I do feel is important that Valdimir is a wild and free animal, and he must remain so.
We want the story to have...
Whales and dolphins sleep, rest differently than humans. They are conscious breathers, which means they must think about each breath they take. Because of this, they do not sleep like any other mammals for hours on end. Instead, one hemisphere of their brain sleeps at a time, while the other half of the brain is awake to surface, breathe, and monitor the environment. They take short 20-25 minutes naps during the day and night and multiple times in 24 hours. When Valdimir sleeps or rests, he usually floats close to the surface, often with his eyes closed. Another issue during the busy recreational summer season, Valdimir has to have sufficient time and space to rest. He usually sleeps under small rowboats at a dock or under the fish farm's catamaran. These are his preferred rest spots.
These resting spots offer a consistent point of reference for Valdimir. He doesn't have a beluga family to provide him with a normal sense of security or belonging, so you'll see him returning to various objects that he comes to rely on. If visitors don't realize how vital these special areas are, they can unintentionally disturb Valdimir. His behavior tells us so much about what he needs, so our best choice is to listen to what his body language is saying so we can respect his wishes and needs. It takes little effort, and it's worth it because our choices make a difference in supporting Valdimir's well-being and his quality of life.
It was apparent from the beginning that Valdimir had some formal training or established comfort around boats. However, over the last 2 years, we have discovered that he appears to have specific preferences for the types of boats he interacts with and the types of behavior he displays. For example, he exhibits close proximity rubbing behavior while resting under a small zodiac or rowboat. It is a form of companionship for him. Funny enough, the color of these boats has typically been white. Next, he seems most interested in following small to medium-sized motorboats lower to the water. These allow him to follow closely, observing the boat's inhabitants and maintaining his speed while changing his position from front and back and on either side.
I think he has displayed when he is around boats. He's quite familiar with the movement of the boats, and as long as the boat drivers are not actually demonstrating erratic behavior and changing of speeds and slowing up and turning sharply very, very quickly, he does seem to demonstrate his ability to manage his position when he is near these boats. He's also demonstrated quite clearly his interest in going for a boat walk. When we were feeding Valdimir in Hammerfest, we did encourage him to follow the boat because it was thought at some point, one, he did seem to be very familiar with following a boat, and two, we weren't certain if we would need to relocate him, and if that did become a necessary decision, then how would we get him to this new location? And following the boat, which he really did seem to enjoy, seemed to be the wisest or the most practical means to do that.
It's important that people are aware of the impact of their actions. Arbitrarily encouraging Valdimir to follow a boat is never a good idea and can inadvertently have very negative consequences for him. It's hypothesized that Valdimir has changed location multiple times after following ferries, workboats, and people who encourage social interaction with him from their private boats. There is little doubt that Valdimir follows people who encourage him to play with them, and because of this, there are many stories where he has followed them home. But then what happens? Quite often, they leave, and he is alone to sort out his new surroundings. This requires him to find new secure areas to rest outside of the lines of daily boat traffic, new hunting grounds, or the nearest salmon farm where fish is plentiful and the routine is familiar. He finds himself alone in unfamiliar territory, in a situation where he has expended additional energy and now must find a new sustainable food supply to replenish his depleted energy reserve. Why he continues to relocate and travel further south is unknown, but the role that humans play continues to be a common denominator.
On multiple occasions, we have seen Valdimir show an agitated or possibly overexcited behavior. This occurred after he followed a boat and the boat stopped moving. In these scenarios, it seems as if he tries to lift the boat or push it, almost as if he would like to make it move again. People must understand that this behavior can be a sign of frustration and potentially put Valdimir, the boat, and its inhabitants at risk. Therefore, learning to understand Valdimir's behavior is an important part of the puzzle. As individuals who have interacted with Valdimir in numerous scenarios, we are cautious not to create too much dependence on these events. Boat walks in the past 2 years have been used primarily to relocate him intentionally. Typically, we have used the relocation technique when his location or behavior put him in a situation of additional danger. The last typical preferred boat seems to be a work or maintenance boat. Valdimir likes to follow ferry routes in both directions and follow fish farm maintenance boats to and from their activities. No. One of the most consistent habits that he displayed relates to his sleeping location. He chooses to sleep or settle himself for more prolonged periods under a maintenance or ferry boat that has a catamaran shape. The double hull structure seems to allow him to rest comfortably and perhaps safely protected from other activity when he is choosing to rest. In several of his extended stay areas, he established this type of behavioral pattern, demonstrated this type of preference for a specific maintenance boat, and would rest in these locations most evenings. He often left with them from their harbor in the mornings as their day began. Catherine Kintzman noted the same type of behavior in other solitary social beluga cases. The hypothesis is that being surrounded by the double hull of a catamaran may be perceived to provide them with some form of protection or comforting association that they cannot experience without being surrounded by a pod of belugas.
Oh wow. He likes to eat the rope. Yeah.
In September 2020, he was still in the Shopswick area, but he had chosen a small harbor nearby. He was resting under a boat tied up there and often playing with the buoys and ropes that held the floating dock. Valdimir likes to play with different objects in the water. These objects could be associated with boats like buoys, ropes, and propellers. Cetaceans, meaning dolphins and whales, have an exceptionally complex brain. Belugas often interact with objects and use their mouths to explore and interact with each other and their environment. Some of our choices can impact both the safety of humans and the health of Valdimir. For example, to put hands, feet, or any objects in the whale's mouth, or to poke his head, eyes, and near his blowhole. We should not try to attract him with objects or toys. Previously, he interacted with balls, buoys, paddles, ropes, wooden sticks, and in a specific case, an elk bone. Beluga's teeth are not for chewing or holding hard objects. It is vital to ensure that we don't give Valdimir any unnatural objects to play with, further damaging his teeth. It is our shared responsibility, whoever is watching after Valdimir and interacting with him, to do what we can to protect his health. An infection to the gums could be fatal to cetaceans, so helping him avoid this is extremely important.
They also asked us about his body condition together with colleagues from the States. And we were all of the opinion that yes, he had lost body condition, but he still looked quite okay. Especially considering he was out there in Norwegian waters without anyone feeding him. Interestingly, in September 2020, pictures were forwarded to us, and you could start seeing, because in July the teeth were perfect. Both upper and lower jaw were perfect, but in September you could start see, or we started seeing that the teeth from the upper jaw were worn off and had exposed pulps, and kind of broken, a bit like he was interacting with something. Some of them were cone-shaped, a bit like when you have bruxism. But he seemed to be fine. And then the next pictures we saw were from February 2021, where he showed a few injuries around his mouth and in his rostrum. And where we could see that the teeth, the upper teeth were gone, and the lower jaw teeth had also worn off quite a bit and had exposed pulps as well. But those injuries were minor. He kept his body condition. He still has abdominal rails, although he is a bit on the slender side, not thin at all. He looks to be quite well off. Another thing we can say from the pictures from last month is that apparently all his teeth are now worn off. They are completely gone. There is obvious pulp exposure in most of them. They are quite black, actually. But there is no objective measure to say if there is an infection or if there is pain, because we don't have access to the animal, and we don't have a blood sample. We don't have a access. We cannot do a gastroscopy. We don't have access to fecal samples, blowhole samples, or gastric samples that we could send to microbiology or even do a cytology, a very basic cytology. We really don't know from a purely objective veterinary point of view if this animal is fine or not. We can only say that its physical condition seems to be maintained, that he is maintaining body weight, and that he has minor injuries along his flanks and obviously in his mouth, in his rostrum. The wound that he had on the side has completely healed up. There's only a scar left, but obviously it's not only his physical condition that should be assessed. It would be important to assess its overall welfare from a holistic point of view, not only from a veterinary point of view. Ideally, these animals should be monitored not only short and mid-term, but long-term, because if its welfare might be compromised despite him maintaining body weight. There is no way we can assess if there is pain related to these wounds or to these to these pulp exposures in the teeth. They're prone to infection, of course, but we don't know if there is an infection because, again, we don't have access to bloods that would tell us. And that's basically all we can say from the pictures that were provided to the committee.
Is that Waldemir is wired neurobiologically to have the capacity to feel a wide range of emotions. Those include pain, fear, excitement. Probably he experiences loneliness. There is a drive in social animals to seek other animals because social animals tend to survive better when we're amongst other conspecifics, others of our species. So it makes perfect sense that Waldemir would be experiencing loneliness, whether it's loneliness and separation from humans or other beluga whales. We don't know. But what I specialize in is looking at parameters of stress, welfare in these animals. And this is not normal behavior for a free-ranging beluga whale to be chewing to the point of self-mutilation, which is what he is apparently doing.
We have seen people swimming with Waldemir. In Norway, it is allowed to snorkel with wild marine mammals. Multiple countries in the world forbid snorkeling to protect cetacean species. Waldemir is a charming whale, but he is also a wild animal. He weighs up to 1,300 kilos and is a little over 4 meters long. Between the ages of 9 and 16 years, male belugas reach sexual maturity. But according to Veronique Lesage, a leading beluga researcher, that range may extend to age 22. Waldemir is estimated to be about 12 to 14 years old. This is one of the core reasons why entering the water with Waldemir should only be considered when absolutely necessary and only by those qualified as experts with the skills, training, and the high level of understanding of his behavioral signals.
If Valdemir was in a normal situation with other male beluga friends, they would interact in physically powerful ways. Humans simply are no match for a naturally rambunctious whale. We do not make good in-water playmates, especially when that play can become forceful or rough. We can't underestimate Valdemir's strength and power, even if he's playing. In fact, sometimes his behavior may be interpreted as play when actually he's giving a warning. People in the water often misinterpret behaviors and may ignore warnings, putting themselves at risk of injury. Valdemir's warnings may arise initially out of feelings of agitation, frustration, or stress. And if those warnings are not heeded, the behaviors may escalate to those we consider aggressive. It's important to appreciate that he may be possessive of various objects in his environment and feel threatened or challenged when people approach him in the water. He may push on a person, accelerate his swimming, abruptly move his head, clap his jaws, grab dive fins and masks, or even bite. Any of these types of behavior are a demonstration of his displeasure with what's going on around him. In no way does this mean that Valdemir is being nasty or bad. He's communicating in the only way he can when he's disturbed by various situations and actions. So, advising against in-water interaction is not meant to curb anyone's enthusiasm for this wonderful whale. This advice is simply to ensure long-term safety for Valdemir and all of his visitors.
If a human gets injured by Valdemir based on their decision to swim with him, Valdemir will, in all likelihood, suffer the consequences. For this reason, we recommend that the general public make the most responsible, respectful, and ultimately safest choice of not swimming with Valdemir.
Over the past 2.5 years of continuing to scan social media, looking for Valdemir and trying to get a better insight into his location and his behavior, I've come across several videos that give me a high level of concern. These are videos where people are entering the water with Valdemir and acting inappropriately. I say inappropriately because most of these individuals have no knowledge of Valdemir and his behavior or even his past training and experience. The concern that I have is that if one day an individual who makes these choices should be injured by Valdemir, it is not just going to be that person who suffers the consequences of their choices and their actions, but these have direct implications on the future survival of Valdemir as well.
Kines is a tiny village near Fauske. It was another significant place in Valdemir's life. He has been on the move for over 2.5 years, and out of these 2.5 years, 7 months was in Kines. We have visited Valdemir twice during these 7 months, in February and April 2021. The location Valdemir had chosen was very remote. During our visits, 2 times 5 days, we have not seen a single boat that has tried to approach Valdemir, and only one Saturday morning a few people gathered to see him on a private dock. Valdemir resided at a salmon farm dock. At the beginning of his arrival, the salmon farm dock was open to the public. However, people tried to visit Valdemir during their working hours. Another reported case was when people wanted to see Valdemir during late evening hours when the workers had already left. As a result, the farm decided to build a fence and restrict people from accessing the salmon farm dock to avoid further issues. The location had 4 salmon farms within a 5 nautical mile, approximately 9 kilometer range, and Valdimir used the space and moved around within these 4 farms. He most often visited the 2 main farms within 1 mile of the salmon farm dock. The farm's catamaran has made its way to the farms and back several times during the day, therefore Valdimir has been observed multiple times at the dock. There were cases when Valdimir decided to stay at the farm, mainly observed under the barge, even though the catamaran went back. The farm was very considerate towards Valdimir. I was in weekly communication with the salmon farm manager, and he was cooperative, gave me weekly updates on how Valdimir was doing. He told me that Valdimir was not a big problem being there. Of course, there were nuances from time to time where they preferred him to stay away from the farm, but they learned to coexist.
Our purpose, our mission is to simply get to know the people that cross paths with Valdimir or people that spend extended periods of time with him, such as the salmon farmers, and try to share with them our knowledge of him, our advice for how to be more cautious. We even know that the salmon farm has been using a drone to be able to look for him before they initiate their daily activities. So it's been quite impressive and interesting to see the lengths that some of these individuals will go to, some of these salmon farmers, especially over the last 6 months that he spent in the same location, being very cautious around him, being very protective of him, and very respectful of him as well.
You are the mothership.
You are his mother. But sometimes he mistaken the boat for the green one. Guy told me that sometimes he tries to push the catamaran.
Yeah? Yeah, he goes on the side.
Underneath.
On the side, yeah?
Under
the boat.
Inside, in between.
Yeah, in between, yeah.
And he goes into one of the sides. Oh.
And is it very hard?
Yeah,
There was a small floating dock next to the salmon farm property for the local boat-förening boat club. It had no boats docked there permanently, and it was tiny. It could house a maximum of 30 people. These 2 docks next to each other gave Valdimir the perfect opportunity to interact with people if he wanted to. However, if he felt he would like to have some peace, he could have just swam over to the salmon farm dock and nobody disturbed him. In April, one day, Valdimir was in the way of a specific salmon farm activity. We have been there and observing from a distance with a drone. The farm had a ring in the water without the net attached, and they were about to deploy a new net. You can see as they lift the net and put it back down with a massive crane on the catamaran. Valdimir was constantly there together with them, playing under the boat. Soon enough, the workers realized that this activity could risk Valdimir's safety, so they approached us and asked if it would be possible to move him away. Of course, we helped the salmon farm and moved Valdimir back to the main farm close to Kines. We had assisted salmon farms several times before if Valdimir was in the way. However, our experience is that Valdimir is not an issue most of the time, and the farms like to have him around. Of course, there are cases when the salmon farms need to work out solutions regarding Valdimir for the benefit of everyone, but the farms were always open so far. So why Valdimir has decided to leave this location, which seemed to be fulfilling his needs for so long? Great question. Unfortunately, we don't know the answer. One thing is sure though. Valdimir got injured again by a small boat propeller at the end of May 2021. He has left the Kines-Fauske area days after the injury. The salmon farm workers had no information about how the injury had happened. The timing of his leave proves our hypothesis that the negative experience of an injury influences Valdimir's location changes. In our opinion, Kines was a perfect location for Valdimir, and we already had our hopes up that he would find his residence and spend an extended period of time there. But unfortunately, it happened elsewhere. Valdimir was traveling for a long time after he had left Kines. He made a quick stop in Bodø and multiple smaller places. One particular area was more important in his travels. He stopped at a place called Melfjord. First, when I got informed that Valdimir was there, I thought it was just another stop like all the others. But then I got the information from the salmon farm where he resided that they have another resident there. A social solitary pilot whale named Grindus, some called him Ronald. The whale has been living there at the salmon farm alone for over 20 years. Valdimir has crossed paths with this pilot whale. I hoped this could be a match made in heaven and he finally settled down with a whale companionship. But unfortunately, Valdimir thought differently. So after 3 days he has left the area. Ronald stayed. I was pretty sad to learn this news, and it gave me more concerns about Valdimir's future. We must say though that the salmon farm where Valdimir met Ronald was empty. The nets had no fish. As we already learned, a working farm with live fish is vital for Valdimir to feed more simply. So this may be one of the reasons that he left. Either way, it is said that he has chosen to continue to be alone rather than spend time with a whale companionship. After Melfjorden, Valdimir visited an industrial harbor called Sandnessjøen and reached the Helgeland region. The area has a lot of small islands, and Valdimir visited several islands and the surrounding salmon farms. After a couple of days of exploring the area, he seemed to find a farm which fulfilled his needs. He ended up on a farm close to Visthus, Fårvik. Visthus is a tiny place, and the nearby harbor, Fårvik, is also not too big, but not as remote as Visthus. Fårvik is also more accessible by car, as it is next to the main road that goes south in Norway. Norby and I decided to give Valdimir the last visit before becoming parents. So we visited Valdimir in early July for a few days. It was the first time we saw Valdimir since April 2021. We found him close to the salmon farm. He came straight to greet us. I asked him to do a lineup to check on his body. Unfortunately, we have immediately realized that something is wrong. Valdimir got hooked. There was a large hook under his right pectoral fin. Most likely from a Hollywood fishing line, we assumed from the size of the hook. While I was asking Valdimir for another lineup, Norby took high-resolution photos of the hook and the wound, so we would be able to share it with the fisheries department, Lindsay, and the veterinarians. Altogether, we were trying to find a solution to help Valdimir. It was also visible that a string was attached to the hook approximately 60-70 cm, and at the very end of it was a metal addition. His propeller injury has healed without any medical intervention, just like the massive cut on his side before. Of course, we followed up his wound with photos and videos, and we shared the data with veterinarians. Finally, we all concluded that we needed to cut the hook out. Of course, we discussed the plan in advance with the fisheries department. The very first day, after several failed attempts, we managed to cut off the end of the string, making it only approximately 10 centimeters long. It was one of the most critical steps, as it was worrisome that with the long string with the metal at the end, Valdimir could stick the metal end into something, for example, seabed or the salmon farm equipment, and it would create further damage. Valdimir is not used to scissors or heavy working equipment or a plier as the fisheries department advised, so it was challenging to encourage him to lie still on the surface. At the same time, we cut the line, but luckily we succeeded. The plan was to cut out the hook the following day if we find him. Valdimir was at the farm again in the morning hours. This became his routine. I asked Valdimir for another lineup and happily saw that the hook was gone. Most likely, as he was swimming, after we shortened the string, the hook just slid out itself. It was confirmed by a veterinarian, as there were still small entrance and exit wounds. We were happy to report to everyone that Valdimir was doing just fine and the hook was out safely. The following 4 or 5 days we spent there. Every single day we took high-resolution images from the wound to follow up if it heals as it should. In addition, we provided veterinarians with fresh photos. They have given us updates on the healing. It was going well. Valdimir was still new to the area when we first were there in July. It was also summertime, so many people tried to look for him after the local media broadcasted that he was around. We spent a lot of time out at sea on the boat, and whoever we met introduced Valdimir, explained his situation, and advised the public how to interact with him safely. I went back in July for an additional 2 weeks to see how Valdimir was doing. It was reassuring that he was still there. I hoped he found another place where he would spend an extended amount of time. By mid-July, he had developed a routine for himself. He spent the mornings at the salmon farm, spent the afternoon in Forwick Harbour. Valdimir regularly visited the small harbor near Visthus, where he mainly chose to rest or have some quiet time. He did not like if people disturbed his privacy in Visthus. It was his quiet place. The salmon farm near Visthus was a cooperative salmon farm, and we got good relationship with the workers. It is essential to connect to the actual workers who spend their time with Valdimir. We talked a lot, and they truly appreciated all the information about Valdimir. They learned a lot. During our discussions, they had no issues having Valdimir around, and he didn't cause any trouble at their farm as per the workers. This was another situation where coexistence was not an issue. Valdimir has spent at least 3 months in Visthus and another 2 months in the surrounding area, bouncing between the other farms in the Helgeland region. So Valdimir spent his mornings at the farm, and early afternoon, when the salmon farm catamaran returned home to the port area in Fårvik, he usually followed the boat there. People learned quite quickly that Valdimir shows up in Fårvik harbor every day, almost always at the same time. We went to Fårvik harbor by ferry and spent afternoons educating the public. It is the most important effort we can make to help Valdimir. Educate the public on behaving around him and give them information about whales and dolphins in general. Most people who encounter Valdimir have never seen a whale from so close. Valdimir, of course, enjoys spending time with people, especially people who he knows from the past. So I think it is good to give him some support in the summertime, mainly to help his interactions with people for everyone's safety, as the summer is busier. However, we should never forget that at this current moment, and probably the situation will be the same for quite some more months, maybe even years, Valdimir has to live in the wild. That means we need to regulate, control his time around humans, and when it is not necessary, we need to reduce his interactions to a minimum with people, salmon farm workers. He does not require any entertainment. It is crucial because otherwise Valdimir will entirely depend on human contact if we occupy him constantly. It can easily jeopardize his survival in the wild. He can lose his independence, which he gained with hard work. Valdimir has proven that he can take care of himself and learned to manage his interactions with people independently. For example, he pulls his head away when he does not want to be touched. We should also never forget how he was thriving in the Kines area for 7 months. That is a very long time without minimal human contact due to the location's remoteness. He has never stayed anywhere for so long, especially not where people constantly occupied him. No. Let it go. I was lucky enough to collect some poop samples as well from Valdimir. I wanted to collect a poop sample for Eve. Do you happen to have a paper cup or something where I can put it in?
Yes, of course.
Because I forgot to bring it. Sometimes when he poops, especially out at sea, it sinks straight away due to the waves. So the moments when we are lucky enough to see him poop, we have to get hold of the sample no matter how. We are looking forward to understanding the result of these samples soon.
Yeah, I saw it. There's another piece over there.
Where?
There.
Where?
There.
Let's try.
Har dere en hav? They have a net. Hey.
Go away.
But it's not gonna try to get it out. Vladimir.
No.
He will be so happy. Okay.
You had your breakfast now.
Some days were busier and some were quieter in Forwick in July. Of course, it was dependent on the weather too. But overall, people were very open to what I had to teach them and, more importantly, to learn about Valdimir and his life. His interactions with people have improved a lot while I was there. Education. For the moment, as an immediate aid, this is what we can do for Valdimir. Teach people to respect him and control their interactions. By now, Valdimir has passed 2/3 of Norway's total length, and he is getting closer and closer to Trondheim, which is Norway's 4th largest city. Trondheim and the surrounding small towns have a total population of approximately 200,000 people. Valdimir had issues with too many people trying to interact with him already back in Hammerfest. Hammerfest has a population of 8,000 people. It would be a considerable increase in the number of people. It is very worrisome that if he continues to travel south, he will get himself in trouble. The only way to help Valdimir in that situation is to educate people, which is the purpose of this film, education.
He knows you. Yes, he likes you.
What Valdimir needs is an educated public. He needs an army of advocates who share a common goal, which is to keep him safe. It's my hope that everyone who has this unique opportunity to see or encounter Valdimir will share the message and educate each other and hold each other accountable for ensuring that behaviors demonstrating respect and appreciation are the only ones that are utilized in his presence.
1.5 months to take pictures of his body, of his teeth, and just to see how he's doing and talk to the salmon farm and the people. Do you think he has a good life? Well, that's a tough question. I mean, compared to a normal whale, no. But I think he makes out of his situation that he's being alone and he needs to live in salmon farms and harbors and everything.
Yeah.
He really tries to make the best out of it, so I think it's okay.
I don't think it's a good idea to compare Valdimir's life circumstances with a white beluga. He is a beluga whale who has, by all indicators, come from human care, and that's why he has a fascination towards, connection with, and to some extent likely a dependency on humans. It probably will always be necessary for Valdimir to connect with people. However, as time passes, he is learning more and more how and where to seek safety from the public interest. He is also one of the few human-bonded whales who have learned to hunt and live in the wild. Despite all of the challenges he has and continues to face, Valdimir is proving that in many ways he can not only take care of himself, but is possibly able to even make the best out of his life while he remains here in Norway. However, his situation remains delicate with few easy solutions. It seems everyone has an idea of what's best for Valdimir. While many people don't want to see him go to an aquarium, some want to build a seaside sanctuary, and others think he should reunite with a wide population of belugas. These efforts would require very complicated logistics, and none come with an absolute assurance of success or would guarantee his survival. Living on his own in the wild in Norway, he faces genuine threats, but is navigating with them our continued help as best as he can. While I feel that none of us will or should be able to choose his future for him, everyone who cares about Valdimir does have a collective responsibility to do our best to protect him and keep him out of immediate danger. In many ways, his continued health, well-being and survival ultimately depend on how we treat and interact with him every day, wherever he ends up. As long as we can help support him, we will.
What is best for Valdimir is a very difficult question, and not one that can be answered with any level of certainty. I think what we do know is that Valdimir has spent nearly 3 years learning to adapt his behavior to meet the necessary requirements of surviving in the vast ocean environment surrounding Norway. So, to Valdimir, I am forever grateful for all that you have taught me. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve you and to share your story. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to continue to be a part of this journey for many more years to come.
There are a lot of ideas out there what would be the best for Valdimir in the long term. However, I think the most important is to make sure that we keep this animal safe and protect him as much as possible. This is a collective responsibility for everyone who encounters him. Please, if you are lucky enough to see Valdimir, make sure you keep him safe and you act respectfully, because the world would be definitely lost without him. Right?